Look, I've been a police officer for almost 16 years, and in that time I've spent 6 of the last 6 years in crash investigation services. We only attend a serious injury, a serious charge or fatal car crashes. Luckily we haven't seen too many fatalities firsthand involving children, but that's not to say that the opportunity hasn't been there for more. And in that I say, fortunately at times you see a vehicle that's been involved in either a fatality or a serious crash, and thankfully the child restraint hasn't been occupied at the time of the collision. But I'll get more into some of the things that I've experienced as a crash investigator later on in the presentation. But certainly as a police officer, particularly in my time in the traffic branch, we used to get a lot of inquiries in relation to the legislation relating to the wearing of seatbelts for children. Now fortunately the legislation changed in the last few years. It used to be quite complicated and difficult to understand. Each section in this new legislation in isolation isn't terribly difficult, but then you obviously get into all the exemptions. So if people do have particular questions in relation to it, I'll be happy to try and answer them at the end of it. But we'll try and keep it as simple as possible just so that people understand. Now it's under the Road Rules 2009, section 266 relates to the wearing of seatbelts by passengers under the age of 16 years of age. And just try and keep it simple, we'll break it down into the categories in which it has placed them. And the recommendation is, or the legislation says, if a passenger is less than 6 months of age, they must be restrained in a suitable and properly fastened and adjusted rear-facing approved child restraint. A lot of words in there that are very important. That it is rearward facing and that is an approved child restraint, and that they are restrained and it's properly fastened. There is no point having a wonderful seat in your vehicle if you don't use it properly. There is no point going out and spending a lot of money on a seat if you don't have it correctly anchored to the proper part of the vehicle. And then the next part of it is 6 months to less than 4, must be restrained again in a properly adjusted and fastened rearward facing approved child restraint or a forward-facing approved child restraint. Now, of course, there are obviously sub-rules to that which obviously relate to children that are above or below height and weight for their age. So in the legislation, it thankfully has common sense written into there as well. So if your child is really quite tiny and they need to stay in their seatbelt or their rearward-facing seat for a bit longer, then that is better to do so than going, oh, they're 6 months, then I must turn that seat around. Common sense must prevail, and obviously the RACT provide very good advice in relation to what's appropriate for each child. And the passengers are between 4 years and 7 years of age to be restrained in a forward-facing approved child restraint that has an inbuilt harness, or an approved booster seat and be restrained by an approved seat belt that is properly adjusted and fastened. Again, properly adjusted and fastened. And there are also sub-rules in relation to that, relating again to appropriate height and weight for the child concerned. And it also goes on, a passenger who is 4 years of age but less than 7 must not be in the front seat or the front row of a motor vehicle that has 2 or more rows of seats unless, so it's starting to get complicated now. So if you've got a sedan, they must sit in the back. If you've got a utility, then clearly you don't have a second row of seats. So they are allowed to be in the front seat of the car. So you have to specify it and break it down to what is actually suitable for you. Now, obviously the legislation says 7 years of age. The recommendation is 12. A child who is 12 years or less should be seated in the rear of the car. The rear of the car is the safest place for a child to be seated. The majority of crashes that we see involve front-end damage or frontal impacts, and clearly a child in the front seat is going to be exposed to more injury or more significant injury, or unfortunately death in some instances, if they are in the front seat of the car. So I'm sorry, until you go to high school, you are sitting in the back seat of the car. And obviously the seatbelt in the rear of the car has to be suitable for that child. I see a lot of children, obviously with the seatbelt cutting across their neck. The injuries that are going to be caused as a result of that are just horrendous. The other issue that I have come across with children in vehicles is people haven't even bothered to put them in any type of seat because it hasn't been, or approved seat because it hasn't been available. And so they've put the adults in the lap sash, so the ones that go across the bottom and across the top of your body, and sat the child in the lap belt only. The lap belt only is generally in the rear of the car, in the middle of the car, and under sudden deceleration, the human body continues to go forward until it strikes something or the energy that the body is subjected to has dissipated. And in some instances, this can involve, and I do know of one, it was a young boy, it was a 40-kilometre impact with a pole, and the young boy has been in a lap seat belt, and obviously the vehicle stops suddenly. He's kept going and he has struck his head on the centre console of that vehicle, not just once but multiple times as the energy is dissipating through his body. He has also suffered lower spinal injuries, as Dr. Williams explained before. Everything stretches. He survived for 7 days and unfortunately he died a short time after that. And a similar incident with a van with a child seated in the front. Again, sudden deceleration, and you have to go somewhere. And unfortunately, the children just aren't as robust as the adult body, and they are the ones that often suffer the consequences of, unfortunately, some parents are well-meaning and they think that the belt that is supplied to the car is suitable for the purposes, but often it is not. During my time in traffic, I saw children that were forced into the footwell in the front seat of a car. Somehow this person thought that that was a suitable place for a child to seat. They both had their seat belts on, and all I saw was this little piece of blonde hair, as soon as I was driving down the street in a marked car, be pushed down so that they didn't get caught. People are only worried about the monetary penalty and fine that they may receive as a result of getting caught with an unrestrained child in the car. They give no thought to the penalty and the cost of life and serious injury that may be incurred to that child because they couldn't be bothered putting that child in a proper restraint. And I have no problem giving out tickets to people who are that foolish and disrespectful for the life of others. And on another occasion, I had a lady that I pulled over. She had 2 children under 4 seated in the one lap seatbelt in the rear of the car. That seatbelt was so loose you could have fitted another child in it, and her excuse to me was, "They're not my children." That was the best ticket I've ever written, and she walked from there. I was not allowing her to move from that spot with those children in the same seatbelt, and the legislation actually says that you cannot seat 2 children or 2 people in the one position when there is only one seatbelt to go around them. And it's actually very specific in relation to that. And my advice to people is, if you cannot safely transport your child in that car, do not get in it. If the only seatbelt available to you to use, and I know that they're still legal, the lap seatbelts, I cannot stand them. I'm passionate about them. I don't like them at all. Don't use it. Catch a taxi, catch a bus, find another way to get to your destination. I still have a car with a lap seatbelt in the rear of my car and I won't allow anyone to use it. I take 3 passengers and that's it. But certainly there's no point having a restraint if you're going to then fit it yourself and fit it incorrectly. If it is not anchored correctly, what will happen? It will peel away. Everything always gives at its weakest point. It has to give somewhere, that energy has to go somewhere, and it will peel away. Even seats that are manufactured, to standard, I have seen the seats in cars, as the transport inspectors would know, actually tear up out of the floor pan because of the energy that has gone through that vehicle during the collision. Seatbelts, I've seen them being worn incorrectly as well, and not just children, a lot of adults are often the worst offenders. Like the doctor said, wearing it under the arm. Well, that is incorrectly fitted and it attracts the same fine as though you were not wearing it at all. Those fluffy things that you see on seat belts, it makes it so much more comfortable, but also may actually prevent that belt from retracting properly as it is designed to do. All of these simple things, they are put into a car for a reason and they are there to be used properly. So like I said, the two fatalities that I have seen involving children, they both involved lap seat belts. And certainly the younger child was in no type of booster seat or any type of seat at all, and his chances of survival were next to zero in a very low speed collision. The airbags as well are obviously a concern for the small child if they are seated too close to them. The injuries obviously increase when their little necks are so small. And even adults that I've seen that have been struck by airbags, they're always bruised. They're always cut somewhere. There's a seam down those bags and you always see faces and they're cut. If you're really lucky, you open the bag up and the lady's makeup's actually perfectly imprinted on the airbag, and I've seen it. So it hits you that hard and it's not soft. The material that they're made from is not soft. It's not like a pillow. And so children, being smaller and being more vulnerable, they just cannot withstand that hitting them. They are safer in the back seat. There are still curtain airbags and things that are designed for the side impacts. Keep them in the back. It is far safer. But a lot of people also don't give thought to the little toys and things that are hanging around trying to keep little Johnny entertained. They can actually, in side impacts, interfere they become a missile as well between the child and the airbag if they are in between them and the restraint that they are seated in. Twists in seat belts as well. Why? Take them out. Firm, low, firm and flat is the message that I give to everybody in relation to the wearing of seat belts, and the same thing applies to children. Across the bony structure of your body, wear it. It's there to be worn properly. And appreciate, obviously we've already covered that they are expensive items, but a lot of people, like I said before, are only concerned with actually being caught. They don't give any consideration to the long-term damage that may be caused to a child as a result of a serious car crash, or to the damage that it's going to cause to them as a driver or as a family member on the loss of a child. There is simply no parent out there that is ever going to recover fully from the loss of a child. They don't cope. It is not the natural order of things that your children should pass before any parent. And yet they still continue to place children at risk unnecessarily, and we have a responsibility, obviously, as police officers, as a community and as health workers to ensure that people are properly educated in relation to the proper use of and in relation to what the law specifies in relation to the use of these child restraints. We all have a responsibility to ensure that our children in the community are kept safe.